Let me ask you something. How many times have you installed Linux? Once? Twice? Maybe 5 or 6 times on different machines with different distributions, different partition schemes, different desktop environments? Each time feeling like this is the one that's finally going to stick? If that sounds familiar, I want you to stop what you're doing right now. Because I'm about to tell you something that nobody told me before my first installation, and nobody told you either, and it's costing you weeks of your life every single year. The Linux reinstall cycle is real. It is extremely common, and it is almost entirely preventable. The reason you keep ending up back at the installer isn't because Linux is hard. It isn't because you're not smart enough. It's because there are 6 specific decisions that look completely harmless inside the installation wizard, that are quietly planting the seeds of every future crash, boot failure, and workflow breakdown you will experience. And by the time those consequences show up, they feel random and mysterious, but they are not random. They are predictable. They are traceable. And if you make the right choices tonight, before the partition table gets written, most of them simply never happen. So if you have a terminal open right now, if you've already booted from a USB drive, I need you to pause. Not because installing Linux is the wrong move, it's one of the best moves you can make as a developer, but because the way most people install it is the way that guarantees they'll be doing it again in 3 months. And I don't want that for you. Let's start with the very first decision, which is also the one where the most people go wrong before they've even touched the installer. Choosing your distribution. Now, I get it. You went to DistroWatch, you read the Reddit threads, everyone said Ubuntu. Ubuntu is beginner friendly. Ubuntu has the biggest community. Ubuntu has 1 million tutorials, and all of that is true. But here's what those recommendations don't tell you. They are describing the best distribution for the average use case, not for your specific case. And the gap between those two things matters more than almost anything else in your Linux journey. Ubuntu's entire design philosophy is built around stability. That's not a flaw. It's a deliberate and excellent choice for certain users. But stability in Ubuntu's model means that the packages in the official repositories are often 6 months to 2 years behind the current releases of the tools that working developers actually need. So you install Ubuntu LTS because that's what everyone recommended, and then you discover that the Node.js version in the repos is ancient, or the Python version doesn't have the feature your project requires, or the Go toolchain is 2 major versions behind. And then you start adding third-party PPAs. You start using NVM for Node versions. You start compiling things from source, and suddenly you're not using Ubuntu's stability model anymore. You're fighting it. The distribution that was supposed to make your life easier is now something you're constantly working around. Fedora exists for exactly this reason. Fedora's philosophy is to ship current software quickly while maintaining enough stability for daily use. For working developers, that alignment is often far more valuable than Ubuntu's LTS model. You get recent versions of your tools out of the box, without the PPA juggling act, without the version manager overhead, for things that should just be available. And if you want to go even further, if you want complete, granular control over every single component on your system, Arch Linux is the answer that its users swear by. Yes, the installation is more involved, but that's intentional. The installation process itself is how you learn the system. And the developers who go through it come out the other side with an understanding of Linux that Ubuntu users with 5 years of experience often still don't have. The point is not that one distribution is objectively better. The point is that the right distribution for you is the one whose design philosophy matches what you actually need from a daily driver. And the only way to make that choice correctly is to understand what each philosophy means in practice. Research this before you pick up the USB drive. It will save you months. Now, assuming you've picked your distribution and you're sitting in the installer, let's talk about the moment that probably feels the most harmless, the partitioning step. Most installers offer you an automatic option. It looks clean. It looks simple. It says something like use entire disk and handles everything for you. And if you accept it without understanding what it's doing, you are setting yourself up for one of the most frustrating experiences in Linux. Running out of space in a specific partition at the worst possible time. Here's what the automatic partitioning typically does. It either puts everything on a single root partition, or it creates a modest home partition alongside root. And for general computing, that's fine. For development work, it's a time bomb. Think about what development actually looks like in practice. You've got Docker images accumulating. You've got language runtimes installed globally. You've got package manager caches and root level directories. You've got compilation artifacts. All of that lives outside your home directory, inside the root partition. And if that partition wasn't allocated enough space, you will hit a wall at the exact moment you can least afford it. A package installation fails. An update won't apply. A container won't start. And you trace it back to a partition that's completely full because the installer's formula never anticipated a developer's actual disk usage. Beyond root and home, there are two more things the automatic installer decides without asking you: swap and boot. Swap size matters for developers because compilation jobs, virtual machines, and containers create memory pressure patterns that the generic formula doesn't account for, and the boot partition, which holds your kernels, tends to fill up over time as updates install new kernels without removing old ones. When boot fills up, you start seeing errors that look catastrophic, but are actually just a housekeeping problem that proper allocation would have prevented entirely. Take the time to understand what each partition is for. Know how much space your actual workflow requires. Make those decisions yourself before you let the installer make them for you. Once you've sorted the distribution and the partitioning, there's a third decision that developers consistently underestimate: the desktop environment. And I want to be honest with you here because this one sounds like a personal preference question when it is actually a performance question. A full GNOME installation, which is what Ubuntu ships by default, and what most new Linux users install because it's what they see in every screenshot and every YouTube video, doesn't just install a desktop shell. It installs an entire ecosystem of applications and background services: GNOME Files, GNOME Terminal, GNOME Software Center, GNOME System Monitor, and dozens of daemons and services that are running in the background, whether you're using them or not. On a machine with 16 gigabytes of RAM, you might not notice. On a machine with 8 gigabytes, which is still a very common amount of RAM for development machines, the competition between the desktop's background processes and your actual development tools is real and measurable. When you're running a development server, a Docker container, a browser with documentation tabs, and a code editor at the same time, the memory that GNOME's background services are consuming is memory that your compiler or your container runtime doesn't have. That directly affects how long builds take. It affects how responsive your environment feels under load. It is a resource allocation decision, and you should make it like one. XFCE uses significantly less memory and still gives you a full desktop experience. i3, Sway, and other tiling window managers go even further. Minimal background overhead, maximum headroom for your tools, and the kind of keyboard-driven workflow that, once you learn it, feels faster than anything a point-and-click desktop offers. Yes, these options require more initial configuration than dropping into a default GNOME session. But the investment in that configuration pays you back every single day in a faster, more responsive environment. Make the choice based on resources, not aesthetics. Here's the one that I see developers skip most often, and it might be the most damaging pattern on this entire list. The installer finishes, the desktop loads, the browser opens. Everything feels functional, and so you start working, you start building, you start installing things. But the system is not actually configured for development yet. It's just installed. And there's a significant difference between those two states that won't become obvious until you're deep enough into your workflow to feel the absence of everything you forgot to set up. The shell environment that ships with a fresh Linux install is generic. It has no aliases that save you from typing the same long commands repeatedly. It has no customized prompt. It has no functions built around your specific workflow. Your Git credentials aren't configured, which means your commits will be misattributed or fail to authenticate. The firewall rules haven't been set up, which means services you expose on local network interfaces are open in ways you might not intend. SSH isn't configured the way you need it. The system's memory management behavior hasn't been tuned for the memory pressure profiles that development work creates. And the terminal multiplexer that would let you maintain persistent sessions across reboots, tmux, zellish, whatever your preference, isn't installed, let alone configured. None of this is optional. All of it is the second half of the installation, the half that no wizard completes for you because it's specific to your workflow and your machine. The developers who sit down and write out their post-installation checklist before the installer even runs are the developers who end up in a configured, productive environment within a day. The developers who wing it are the ones who spend the next 3 months slowly noticing things that aren't quite right and patching them reactively, one frustration at a time. Write the checklist. Run through it every time. Treat it as non-negotiable. Now we need to talk about something that sounds intimidating but is genuinely critical to understand before you install Linux on any machine: the boot process. Because the boot is where the most catastrophic feeling problems happen, and almost all of them are completely avoidable with basic conceptual understanding of what's going on. Grub, the Grand Unified Bootloader, is the software that runs before the operating system. Its job is to find your kernel, load it into memory, and hand control to it. Grub's configuration file is what determines which operating systems are available at boot, which one is default, how long it waits before booting automatically, and what parameters get passed to each kernel. When you install Linux alongside Windows and then restart, And Windows overwrites the bootloader without knowing Linux exists. You see a machine that appears to have forgotten Linux entirely. It hasn't. The Linux installation is still on the drive. The bootloader that was pointing to it has simply been replaced by one that doesn't know it's there. Understanding grub means you can fix that in 10 minutes. Not understanding it means you spend 3 hours on forums convinced the installation is corrupted. UEFI Secure Boot adds another layer that trips up a significant number of people. Secure Boot is a firmware feature that prevents unsigned bootloaders from executing. It exists for legitimate security reasons, but its interaction with Linux requires either disabling it in your UEFI firmware settings or using a signed Linux bootloader that your firmware accepts. When Secure Boot rejects an unsigned bootloader, the error it displays is not written for someone who has never heard of Secure Boot. It looks like a catastrophic failure. It is not. It is a configuration step that takes 2 minutes once you understand what it's asking for. Know whether your machine uses UEFI. Know whether Secure Boot is enabled. Know how your chosen distribution handles it. Look this up before the installation runs, not after the boot fails. And then there is the backup strategy. I've saved this for last, not because it's the least important, but because it is the one single change that most dramatically transforms the experience of using Linux long term. And yet, it is the one that people almost universally skip. Because when you've just finished a fresh installation, the last thing on your mind is protecting something that doesn't yet contain anything worth protecting. That instinct is exactly what makes the backup strategy so easy to skip and so painful to not have. Timeshift is the tool that makes this effortless. And what Timeshift does is take file system snapshots, complete records of the system's state at a specific point in time that you can restore instantly if something goes wrong. And something will go wrong. Not because Linux is unstable, but because development work involves experimentation. You try new kernel versions. You install new drivers. You test system-level configuration changes. You apply updates that occasionally have unintended consequences. Without Timeshift, each one of those experiments carries real risk. A failed update that breaks your boot sequence means a full reinstall and the loss of every hour of configuration work you've done since installation. With Timeshift configured, you restore the snapshot taken before the update was applied, and you're back to a working system in 5 minutes. Not 5 hours, 5 minutes. Set up Timeshift immediately after finishing the base installation. Before configuring anything else, set it to take daily snapshots and keep the last 7 days. Store those snapshots on a separate partition or a separate drive from your root partition, because if root fails, you want your recovery tool to be somewhere that's still accessible. Once Timeshift is running, you can experiment with your system configuration the way a confident, experienced Linux developer does, fearlessly, because you always have a clean path back. The difference in how you use a Linux system with a backup strategy versus without one is not subtle. It changes your entire relationship with the machine. What all of these mistakes have in common: the wrong distribution, the automatic partitioning, the resource-heavy desktop environment, the missing post-install configuration, the misunderstood boot process, the absent backup strategy. The difference is that they all make the installation faster and easier tonight and harder and more frustrating for every week and month that follows. They front-load convenience and backload pain. The right installation does the opposite. It costs more time tonight, more research, more intentional decisions, more checklist items to work through, and it pays that cost back every single day that you work in an environment that actually fits you rather than one you're constantly working around. There's something worth acknowledging about why this information doesn't usually reach people before their first installation. The Linux community, broadly speaking, teaches by survival. You make the mistakes, you hit the consequences. You learn to fix them, you come out the other side with hard-won knowledge, and there's genuine value in that process. The understanding you earn by debugging a boot failure or recovering a full partition is deep and lasting, in a way that just reading about it isn't. But the survival learning model has a cost, and the cost is paid in time and frustration and reinstalls by people who were motivated and capable enough to choose Linux in the first place, but who never got the guidance they needed before the decisions were already made. This is that guidance. And the fact that you have it now means the next installation you do can be the last one you do for a long time. Not because nothing will ever go wrong, but because you'll have the foundation, the configuration, and the recovery tools to handle whatever does go wrong without starting over from scratch. So here's what I want you to actually do in the right order. Before you touch the installer, research the distribution whose design philosophy matches your actual daily workflow, not the one with the most upvotes, the one that's built for what you do. Understand its package currency model, its update cadence, its community support structure, and whether those things serve your needs. While you're doing that research, think about your disk usage patterns and plan a partition scheme that gives each section of the file system enough room to breathe as your work grows. not just enough room to survive a fresh install. Decide on your desktop environment based on how much RAM you want to reserve for your development tools, and accept that the right answer might not be the prettiest screenshot you found. Write down your post-installation checklist. Every configuration step you know you'll need: shell setup, Git credentials, SSH keys, firewall rules, performance tuning, development tool installation, all of it written down and ready to execute the moment the installer finishes. Learn the basics of grub and UEFI before you start, so that the boot configuration the installer sets up is something you understand and can work with, not a black box that terrifies you when it fails. And the very first thing you do after the desktop loads, before you configure anything else, before you install a single tool, is install and configure Timeshift. Take your first snapshot right there against the clean base installation. Every snapshot after that is another point you can return to if anything goes wrong. That safety net is what makes everything else possible. The Linux environment you deserve to work in is not produced by the fast installation. It is produced by the right installation. And now you know the difference. The only thing between you and a stable, performant, properly configured Linux development environment is the decision to stop, to plan, and to begin with intention rather than impatience. You've already made that decision by watching this far. Now go build the thing properly.